Welcome back. Let's continue from our last video. Those watching were filled with awe, exclaiming at Duran's performance and remarking on how impressive and cool he was. In contrast, the new recruit's representative, Leo, was moving quickly along the track, but the students on the sidelines frowned as they assessed his speed. They found it unbelievable how relatively slow he seemed, reiterating their belief that he must have become the representative through some deceptive means. Unlike the majority of the students, Chelsea cupped her hands around her mouth like a megaphone and loudly cheered for Leo, urging him on. On the track, Duran remained focused, running with intense concentration. Car Thomas, observing Duran's progress, felt a touch of worry, noting that Duran was already halfway across the field and far ahead of Leo. Leo continued to run forward steadily. Suddenly, while still running, he abruptly changed direction, veering off the main path. Celia, witnessing this, called out in confusion, wondering where that idiot was going. Leo paid little attention to the whispers around him. He stomped his foot hard on the ground, and using the momentum generated from the forceful stomp, Leo launched his body high into the air. He landed on a high platform, turning his head slightly to look at Duran, who was still running ahead on the ground. Leo's foot continued to stomp hard on the platform's surface below, causing it to crack. He then used this momentum to launch himself forward again. Seeing this unexpected maneuver, Duran paused for a brief moment. He turned his head to look at the platform Leo had used behind him. Then, with a loud burst of speed, Leo's body rushed ahead with incredible velocity. In no time at all, Leo had caught up to Duran. He smirked and stated that he would be the best, referring to Duran as a slowpoke. Hearing this, Duran yelled back angrily in surprise. Leo ignored his reaction. His body felt as light as a feather, and he landed back on the ground almost instantly. Seeing Leo suddenly ahead of him, Duran broke out in a cold sweat. Leo turned his head slightly and gave a bright smile. The ground near the platform where Leo had stomped remained cracked. The students gathered around, witnessing this scene, were wide-eyed with surprise. They exclaimed in disbelief, saying that what they had just seen was no joke. They commented that Duran was supposed to be the fastest first-year student but had unexpectedly been defeated by Leo. They also expressed confusion as they were sure they had heard that Leo hadn't learned the light steps technique. Celia, standing nearby, also found it hard to believe what she had just witnessed. She thought to herself in disbelief that it wasn't light steps at all, it was something else, like phoenix steps. Chelsea, beside her, also enthusiastically exclaimed how amazing Leo had been and how cool he was. Instructor Ein stood still, his arms crossed, deep in thought. He noted that Duran had used his ultimate technique, Thunder Aura, to boost his speed, which was a predictable move, but acknowledged that Duran's speed was truly impressive. Meanwhile, Instructor Ein observed that although Leoplav's initial speed was slower, he had applied his aura much more effectively. He had gathered and focused his fire aura on his feet, creating a powerful light step, which Instructor Ein considered an excellent application of the technique. At that moment, on the track, Leo walked toward Duran. He held out his hand, smiling, and stated that it had been a good race and suggested that if it had been a long-distance race, the results might have been different. Duran still seemed unable to accept the outcome. He brushed Leo's hand away, turned, and walked away, clearly annoyed, telling Leo to get lost. Instructor Ein, still standing in place, smiled to himself, contemplating that among this generation of disciples, a hero might finally be born. Chelsea stood still, clenching her fist with determination, and stated that Leo had been amazing and that she wanted to train with him too. Carr, hearing this, expressed his unwillingness to accept the situation, asking Celia why Chelsea was always focusing on Leo and not him, feeling that she should pay attention to him as well. Celia, hearing Carr's complaint, crossed her arms and responded indifferently that it was obvious. Carr didn't fully understand but also didn't dwell on it. He waved his hand and suggested that since class was over, everyone should go to a cafe and that he would treat them today. Hearing this invitation, Leo immediately declined, apologizing and stating that they should go by themselves. Everyone was surprised by this refusal. Leo didn't offer any further explanation, simply turning and leaving. Seeing him depart, Carr called out, asking where he was going. Leo replied nonchalantly that he was going to attend the summoning class. Receiving this answer, Carr rubbed the back of his neck, wondering why a night student would attend a summoning class. Celia also expressed her confusion, stating that she didn't understand what Leo was thinking. Leo walked slowly through the campus, lost in thought. He mused that there was one thing he still didn't understand, why the Spirit King had given him the oath as a reward. He reasoned that rewards from a hero's world were connected to the power of the world's owner, and the reward he had received was related to summoning. However, he knew that Professor Albi was a pure mage and had nothing to do with summoning. Typically, he would have received a magic-related ability as a reward. Furthermore, he understood that to make a contract with a spirit he would need to go to the spirit realm, making the reward currently useless. As he was contemplating this, a voice suddenly called out from behind him, asking if he was also attending the summoning class. Hearing this, Leo turned around cautiously to see who it was. Leo inwardly noted that the person who had arrived was Shinsha, the leader of the West. She smiled and greeted him, expressing her pleasure in meeting him. Leo slowly approached and replied in kind, stating his pleasure in meeting Shinsha. Shinsha nodded slightly and asked him to just call her Xia, mentioning that she believed he was a student from the night department and expressing her surprise that he would also be interested in summoning. As they spoke, the two of them walked slowly forward. Leo turned slightly and confirmed his interest in spiritualism. Hearing that, Xia smiled and said they would see each other often, then asked if he could tell her which spirit he had made a contract with. Xia then produced her own spirit, displaying it, and asked Leo to show her his spirit. Hearing this request, Leo replied that he hadn't made a contract yet. Xia was quite surprised by this information. She asked if he was serious and offered to provide advice about summoning spirits if he ever needed help in the future, suggesting he feel free to call her. Leo did not refuse the offer. He nodded and replied that he would count on her, then inquired about her age. Xia replied that she was 17, narrowing her eyes slightly as she noted that Leo was 15, recalling seeing him talking to Celia. Hearing this, Leo frowned internally, thinking that she was 17 but looked so young, even younger than Chelsea. The atmosphere between them suddenly became strangely quiet. Xia looked at Leo, then approached him suspiciously, asking if he had been thinking something inappropriate. Hearing this accusation, Leo quickly denied it. Then Xia commented that she had been deeply impressed by his match against Duran. Hearing her mention the match, Leo asked if she had seen it. Xia nodded, confirming that she had. As if remembering something important, Xia suddenly straightened up. With a determined expression, she stated that one day she would ask him to accept her challenge as well. Hearing this, Leo laughed and readily agreed, saying, "Of course." Receiving his affirmative answer, Xia narrowed her eyes and smiled contentedly. At the summoning department in the exploratory class area, most of the students had already arrived. Leo and Xia walked slowly towards the gathering. Seeing the small number of people present, Leo expressed his surprise, asking if that was everyone. Xia rubbed her chin and explained with a slight stutter that summoning wasn't a popular choice and that this was only an exploratory class. Hearing that, Leo nodded, acknowledging that it made sense, but adding that he hadn't expected the class to be held in this particular location. As soon as he finished speaking, a fluttering sound echoed in the sky. Someone shouted in alarm, asking about a black wyvern and where it had come from. An unknown black wyvern flew down and landed, lowering its face close to the student who had just spoken. That student stumbled backward in fear, trembling and shouting for it to get away. At that moment, another voice rang out, explaining that the wyvern was acting that way because it liked the student. The voice then greeted the first-year students, introducing the speaker as Marin, their summoning teacher for the freshman year. Hearing this introduction, the students were filled with admiration, some expressing their desire to become summoners like the teacher. Leo, standing on the side, observed quietly. He recalled Dweno's words about a woman with a different kind of beauty that was captivating. Recalling such a statement, Leo smiled to himself, thinking that if Dweno were here, he would undoubtedly be completely overwhelmed. After a quick greeting, Yura instructed the black wyvern to sit down and rest by a tree. She then addressed the students, stating that by being there, these fresh green sprouts demonstrated some talent for becoming summoners. Hearing their teacher's statement, all the students responded in unison, confirming their talent. Yura acknowledged their clear response and said it was good, announcing that they would immediately move to the practice area. Having said this, Yura called out a name, Carlo. As soon as she spoke the name, a foot with sharp claws descended onto the ground from above. A man with a smile stepped down, holding the neck of his giant bird. This man was Carlo, the assistant professor for the first-year summoning class. Yura then stepped over to Carlo and his bird and stated that the students would fly together in groups of 2, instructing them to get onto the griffins. As soon as she gave the command, many griffins descended one after another beside the students. One student, looking slightly scared, mentioned that it was their first time riding griffins. Hearing this, Professor Yura's eyes became as cold as ice. She remarked that it sounded like the student did not wish to listen to her lectures. After saying this, she leaped onto the black wyvern's back, leaving the student with a single sentence: if he thought he couldn't do it, he should go back. As soon as she finished speaking, the black wyvern immediately spread its wings and flew high into the sky. It opened its mouth and let out a loud roar, creating a huge gust of wind below. The students watched this scene intently. Seeing that the black wyvern had carried Yura far away, Carlo instructed the students to quickly follow the professor. The students, hearing this, did not delay any longer and quickly climbed onto the backs of the griffins. They found these birds to be much gentler than they had imagined. Just as they had this thought, a griffin opened its beak and snatched a student up into the air. The student, startled by being picked up, cried out in panic, begging to be let down. On the side, Xia turned to look at Leo, who was leading a griffin, and asked if she could hold the griffin's reins. Leo turned his head slightly and politely replied that she should feel free to do as she pleased. The students were soon ready. In teams of 2, they mounted the griffins and quickly chased after Yura. The students were very excited, talking to each other while flying through the sky. They expressed their surprise at getting to ride griffins and commented on Lumene Academy's impressive resources. They also discussed switching places, with one student wanting to ride and asking another to wait a little longer. On the other side, Leo and Xia were riding the same griffin. Xia, controlling the reins, expressed her excitement, saying she had been a bit worried but found the griffin gentler than she had thought. Leo, sitting behind her, softly reminded her that it was always better to be careful as griffins were challenging summons for first-time riders to control. Hearing this, Xia asked curiously if that was true even with this friendly griffin. Leo nodded and began to explain, saying that's because, but before he could finish his sentence, Yura in front suddenly took out a whistle and blew a loud note. The whistle's sound echoed through the vast blue sky. The griffins, hearing the sound, suddenly developed sharp and intense looks in their eyes. They opened their beaks and roared, and the sudden change in their behavior caused the students to cry out in fear, lamenting that the griffins were no longer listening to them and asking why they were acting this way so suddenly, calling for the professor's help. Leo was not surprised by this turn of events. He murmured that the griffins were still listening to the professor even now. Riding on the back of the black wyvern, Yura smiled and stated that she had wondered if they truly thought they could call themselves students of Lumene Academy if they couldn't even handle a griffin, challenging them to try controlling the creatures themselves. Her words rang out through the air, and the griffin that Xia was controlling completely stopped obeying her commands. Seeing this situation, Leo reached his arms forward, grabbed the reins, and whispered that griffins possessed a strong sense of pride, so using force to dominate them would only increase their resistance. Xia was quite surprised by this action. She turned her head slightly and, feeling a bit shy, asked Leo what he was doing. Leo's hand was now holding Xia's, and he was controlling the griffin through the reins. Leo did not answer Xia's question directly but smiled and said, "Let's go." Following Leo's control, the griffin obediently flew forward. Yura and Carlo, observing the scene, both focused their attention on him. Yura thought to herself that his technique was not bad. Thinking this, she turned to Carlo with her arms crossed and asked if the first-year representative was a candidate from the night department. Carlo, hearing this, quickly flipped through the documents, checked the information, and responded that he believed that was indeed the case. Hearing this, Yura asked if Leo owned his own griffin at home, wondering why he was so skilled at handling the creature. Carlo quickly skimmed through Leo's profile again and shook his head, replying that Leo did not belong to a noble family that would typically possess a griffin. This information made Yura quite interested. She smirked and concluded that he must be a natural talent, a hidden gem. Very quickly, everyone arrived at the summoning island, the designated practice area for the summoning class. The students quickly jumped off the griffins, some bowing their heads in fear and others feeling nauseous. Leo appeared completely unaffected. He put his hands in his pockets and walked forward, looking up at a ripe fruit on a tree. Leo reached out and plucked the fruit. Attached to the stem of the fruit was a feather. Xia, seeing this from behind, asked curiously what it was. Leo, holding the feather attached to the ripe fruit, shook his head and stated that it was nothing. He then gave the ripe fruit to the griffin. As he was feeding the bird, Yura's voice rang out telling everyone to stop fooling around and focus. All the students, hearing this command, quickly gathered in one place. At this moment, Yura announced that from then on they would be participating in a practical exam. Hearing this, a student spoke up, questioning a practical exam on the very first day, especially since they were still in the exploratory class period. Without letting the student finish speaking, Yura immediately interrupted him, stating that compared to the other two fields of study, the path summoners must take is much longer. She asked if anyone present did not know this, explaining that for summoning, it was not enough to simply control mana. To make a contract with a spirit, one also needed to be liked by spirits, and to command summons, taming ability was essential. Summoner heroes appeared less often than those in other types of combat. However, summoners who did achieve heroic status accomplished far more than other heroes. That potential was the reason everyone had gathered there. They dreamed of becoming that exceptional kind of hero. When asked if this dream was why they came, the entire group responded in agreement. Suddenly, one person stepped forward. This individual was Eliza Herjin, a well-known summoner from the famous Herjin family in the north. She inquired about the specific nature of the exam. Yura began to explain slowly that the island they were on was called Summoning Island, and as its name suggested, it was populated by summons, which served as weapons for summoners. The test would assess their taming abilities, and the task itself was straightforward. They needed to tame a summon within the forest and bring it back. Once tamed and a contract formed, the creature would become their own summon. These words sparked considerable excitement among the students. They immediately dispersed in various directions, eagerly searching for summons and expressing their enthusiasm loudly. Meanwhile, Leo from Lumene Academy remained stationary, observing the unfolding scene. Just then, a voice called out from behind him. It was Eliza Herjin, the prominent summoner, expressing mild surprise upon recognizing him as the distinguished representative of the new recruits. She walked slowly towards him, mentioning that rumors of his victory over Duran had already spread, and she looked forward to seeing him in summoning class. Xia and Walden, who were nearby, turned to look when they heard this exchange. At that moment, Leo turned away and began walking, giving a wave of his hand and leaving behind only a brief comment that he was merely passing the time. Eliza frowned upon hearing this, her gaze fixed on Leo's retreating back. Yura stood observing the situation from the side, a smirk forming on her face as she thought to herself that these two would likely be the key players among the first-year students. The students ventured deeper into the island's forest, encountering many summons. Some individuals had already managed to tame creatures successfully. They noticed Leo moving further into the woods and began whispering about him, pointing out that the new recruit representative was going too deep. Someone else responded indifferently, suggesting they let him go and speculating that if he failed to tame a summon and received a 0, he would return to the night course. They doubted summoning could be so easy for him. Leo paid no attention to these remarks and continued deeper into the forest until he reached a secluded spot. He reached into his pocket and retrieved a feather he had found earlier. Holding the feather in one hand and making a hand sign with the other, he raised it high. Instantly, a brilliant red flame engulfed his body. The feather in Leo's hand rapidly absorbed the flame. Seeing this, Leo chuckled, confirming that his suspicion about the feather was correct. Elsewhere, outside that particular forest, the sky was clear. A small frying pan sizzled with a fried egg and beef. At the same time, a woman's voice, tinged with worry, expressed concern for Leo, wondering if he was doing well. Another person, taking the cooked food from the pan and placing it on a plate, slowly replied that it was only Leo's first day, suggesting the woman, Reina, was already worrying too much. Reina, hearing this, still felt restless, her thoughts focused on her son. Meanwhile, deep within the forest on Summoning Island, a powerful flame erupted. Leo stood near the intense heat, raising one hand to shield his face. Simultaneously, his mother Reina smiled and confidently told the person in front of her that nothing could possibly happen to him. Inside the great vortex of fire, a sweating Leo realized the intense heat signified one of the 3 great summons, the Phoenix. That's a wrap. The story continues in my next video. Like and subscribe to stay notified.